Happy morning, all. How are you, all of you? Hope you're doing well in this COVID pandemic. So we are resuming the class because if we give too much of breaks, then at the last it will be difficult for us to cover all the topics. So we have kept few extra classes for the repetition, for your doubts to clear, all those things. So that's why we have started. So this gonadotropin topic is very much like, it is very useful in infertility because we are using this gonadotropins day in, day out. So we'll come to know like what are the different types of gonadotropins, how they are prepared, what precautions we have to take, and few interesting cases I'll just discuss related to gonadotropins today. So coming to gonadotropins, so for whatever like all of you are able to hear me, no? There is no disturbance, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, then I'll start. Okay. So in 1927, this Ashim and Zondak, they discovered a substance in the urine of the pregnant women with the same action as the gonadotropic factor in the anterior pituitary. They called this substance gonadotropin or prolon. Furthermore, they believed that there were two distinct hormones, prolon A and prolon B. They subsequently used their findings to develop pregnancy tests that carried their names. In 1930, Zondak reported that gonadotropins were also present in the urine of postmenopausal women. So this discovery of the gonadotropins started from 1927. So in 1947, Piero, a scientist at Pharmaceutical Institute Sereno in Rome, he tried to purify this HMG from postmenopausal urine. The first urine extract of gonadotropin contained FSH-LH, and this was called as Pergonal. So in 1947, they tried to extract the HMG injection from the postmenopausal women urine. So in 1957, urinary FSH and purified FSH developed using specific monoclonal antibodies to bind the FSH and LH. So in 1957-59 onwards, they started purifying these injections because impurity, a lot of impurity had a lot of reactions and all. So they started thinking about purifying the hormones and then developing the recombinant hormones. So in 1960, clinical use of clomiphene citrate was started. In 1966, the use of gonadotropin became very common. In 1982, use of gonadotropin agonist in infertility treatment was started. In 1985, further purification of urinary gonadotropins were done. And in 1990, use of recombinant gonadotropin started. With the invention of the recombinant technology, so we have got the purified forms of injections. So this is the picture of the two great scientists, that is Andrew Sale and Roger Guillemin. They received Nobel Prize in 1971 for unveiling the chemical structure and synthesizing the GnRH. Coming to understanding this downregulation. Why we require all these injections? So how they help in ovarian stimulation? So one is GnRH is produced and released from the group of loosely connected neurons. So mainly it is in the medial basal hypothalamus in the arcade nucleus, and also preoptic area of ventral hypothalamus. They are synthesized in the cell body and transported along the axons to the synapse, and they are released in a pulsatile fashion into the complex capillary network of portal system of pituitary glands. Here you can, in this image, you can see here. So in the mainly the arcade nucleus as well as the preoptic nucleus of ventral hypothalamus. So these hormones, GnRH, is produced and it is released in a pulsatile fashion. So into the pituitaries. Coming to GnRH receptors. GnRH receptor is a complementary DNA. Complementary DNA contains 328 amino acids. It is a cell surface receptor. It belongs to the serpentine or 7 transmembrane family of receptors. So it is mainly a G protein coupled receptor. It lacks the typical intracellular carboxy terminus and has a relatively short third intracellular loop, which is resistant to rapid desensitization. So these are mainly the chemical structure which I have just narrated. Just remember, these are cell surface receptor. It acts via G protein mechanisms, coupled mechanisms. And also coming to the mechanism of action of GnRH. So GnRH goes and binds to the GnRH receptor. There is breakdown of phosphoinositide. So IP3 and DAG pathway is activated. There is calcium release from the intercellular stores. There is activation of protein kinase C, and there is synthesis and secretion of FSH and LH. That is how the mechanism of GnRH happens. So location of the GnRH receptors, they are mainly present in the pituitary, and in the extrapituitary sites, they are present in the ovary, testis, placenta, as well as in some receptors are found in the myometrium as well. So in the malignant cells, they are present in case of in the malignant cell, few receptors can be expressed in the breast, endometrium, ovaries, and prostate. So next, coming to the native GnRH molecule. So this single chain usually contains 10 amino acids, that is decapeptide. So since it has 10 amino acids, we call it as decapeptide. So usually each amino acid which is present in the particular position of this hormone is responsible for the certain actions of the GnRH. So if we modify this certain amino acids in certain positions, we can change the mechanism of action or increase its half-life like that. So by modifying the amino acids, we can like GnRH agonist and antagonist were synthesized. That I will talk to you in detail in the next session. So this native GnRH molecule, so if we see there are 10 amino acids, in the second position, it is histidine, so which helps in the release of the hormone. Next, one more amino acid, which is at the position 6, that is glycine is very much important, which is responsible for enzymatic cleavage and also short T-half. And also the 10th amino acids, that is aminoglycine structure. So it is responsible for potency and biological activity. So mainly the amino acids in the position 1, 6, and 10. They are very much important and they are responsible for 3D structure. By changing these amino acids in these 3 positions, we can get the other derivatives. So coming to gonadotropin preparations, when they started extracting, like when they discovered there is a gonadotropin, it was in the impure form. They started purifying it. So with the purifications, they developed the 3 generations of gonadotropins. There are 3 generations of gonadotropin preparations. One is the first generation derived from human urine. The second generation, which is derived from, which is the purified urinary gonadotropins. The third generation is highly purified preparations. In the past few years, recombinant preparations have been made available through the application of recombinant technologies. Coming to the first generation preparations, the FSH accounts only 2% of the protein content and 98% are uncontrolled extraneous urinary proteins. Initially, when they discovered the product, when they took the urine and they discovered it, so only whatever the required hormone was only 2%. The rest of 98% are the uncontrolled proteins, urinary proteins. So because of so much of proteins, there was a lot of side effects. There was batch to batch variability and is a potential disadvantage. The women always needed a visit to the doctor or a nurse for an intramuscular injection. So since it has the more protein, subcutaneous injection was not possible. So it was an intramuscular injection. So every time the patient was supposed to visit a doctor or a nurse. Although HMG preparations are elective, so usually in a selective populations, we will use it and it is relatively safe. The local side effects such as pain and allergic reaction related to the non-gonadotropin proteins were documented in certain cases. Because of this side effects, they started thinking about purifying it. Purifying it means increase the quantity of the gonadotropin which is required and reduce the quantity of the unwanted urinary proteins. So then they thought about this urinary purification procedures. Like so many methods they started inventing to purify this preparations. So the second generation is the urofolliculotropin, which is made by purification of the natural human menopausal gonadotropin. They provide more than 95% of the purified FSH with virtually no LH activity. So there was batch to batch consistency was the potential advantage. The purity allows the subcutaneous injections, which may be self-administered to make the fertility treatment more convenient. In patients with elevated serum LH level, ovulation induction can be performed with pure FSH without exogenously administered LH. So in the second generation of protein, they started purification of the human menopausal gonadotropins itself. So in that, what they have done is they try to remove the proteins and increase the gonadotropin concentrations. So because of less proteins, the batch to batch consistency. Batch to batch consistency means suppose there is batch number 1 injections. So you will use it and you will get a good response. And another batch of injections, another batch which is prepared will be batch 2, batch 3, batch 4. Sometimes in the batch 1, you'll observe good response. Sometimes in the batch 2, you won't observe the good response. Maybe or side effects may be more because of lot of proteins. In batch 3, you may experience moderate response. This happens, that is batch to batch inconsistency. There is no consistency or there is no you won't get the same results between different batches of injections. This is called as batch to batch inconsistency. So this is mainly because of the impurities. So if you remove the impurities, so if the gonadotropin concentration is more, suppose if it contains 95% of the purified FSH, means each batch action will be similar. So that's what we call it as batch to batch consistency. So whenever we are talking about this gonadotropins, HCG, HMG injections, FSH, LH, I'll be speaking more about this batch to batch consistency, purity. So that is what I mean. That is batch to batch consistency means. So, and also if the impurities are less, if the side effects are less, we can administer those injections subcutaneously. If the injections can be administered subcutaneously, what is the advantage? Patient can take the injection at home only. They need not visit the hospital. So now coming to different forms of gonadotropins. One is most commonly used in our day-to-day practice for ovulation induction is human menopausal gonadotropin, that is HMG injection. This human menopausal gonadotropin, they contain equivalent quantity of 75 international units of FSH and 75 international units of LH. Usually, Cook et al. In one study, Cook et al. Demonstrated that HMG preparations also contains up to 5 different FSH isohormones and up to 9 LH species. These differences may cause discrepancy in the patient's response, occasionally observed when using various slots of same preparations. So in one study, what they have told us, yes, they'll have FSH equal quantity of FSH and LH quantity. So even in the FSH, there are different isohormones. Even in the LH, there are different isohormones. So if the quantity of these isohormones differs in different batches, a slight difference in the response between different batches of injection can be obtained. That is what this study means. So usually it is obtained from the urine of postmenopausal women. It was obtained from the urine of postmenopausal women in Italy. The early preparations were originally was about 5% pure. And it contained all the things like FSH, LH, HCG, everything. There was no proper purification. So with the improvement of purification techniques, it resulted in standardization of preparations. So usually it possesses the hormonal effect similar to those of naturally occurring FSH and LH. The LH activity in HMG is derived from the HCG component, which was concentrated during purification procedure. And sometimes it is added to achieve desired amount of LH-like biological activity. So usually if you take 75 international units of HMG, like it has 75 IU of FSH action and 75 IU of LH. And this kind of LH activity, many studies have quoted, this kind of LH activity may be because of little bit of HCG component which is there during the purification procedures. And also sometimes some brands of injections, they add little bit of HCG they will add to the HMG to mimic the LH activity. Usually the quantity of HCG will be very less. So different proteins found in various HMG, and even though we tell it contains 95% of the desired FSH and LH hormone, 5% of proteins are there which are impure, which is not required. So in those different types of protein which are found in various HMG preparations are, one is tumor necrosing factors, binding protein 1, transferrin, urokinase, Tom Oswald glycoproteins, epidermal growth factor, and immunoglobulin related proteins. So because of these proteins, they'll have a local side effects such as pain, allergic reactions have been reported and attributed to the immune reaction related to non-gonadotropin proteins. Technological improvements in the recent year have resulted in introduction of highly purified HMG, which can be administered subcutaneously. Highly purified HMG contains more HCG and less LH than the previous traditional HMG preparations. Accordingly, HMG and highly purified HMG induce different follicular development profiles. So because of the improvement in the technology, there is we have got highly purified HMGs also. In highly purified HMGs, the amount of the proteins are very less, so that injection can be given subcutaneously. Even in highly purified HMG, it may contain because of purification procedure. So more amount of FSH/LH, even little bit of more of HCG may be there. So the response will be good if we use a highly purified HMG compared to plain HMG. So a total of 34 co-purified proteins were recently identified in highly purified HMG products. Importantly, human prion peptides were also detected in HMG as well as highly purified HMG. The identification of human prion proteins in commercially available formulations has prompted careful examination of the risk of transmission of prion disease by urinary gonadotropins. Only mild, very minimal amount of human prion peptides can be found in HMG as well as highly purified HMGs. So all of us know this prion scare and how this prion diseases are transferred. There will be a remote possibility, very rare chances of transmission of this human prion proteins by giving urinary preparations. Now coming to this urinary FSH preparations, the removal, what they do is, so take a HMG. In HMG, both FSH and LH will be there. So if we remove the LH, we will get urinary FSH. So removal of LH with monoclonal antibodies resulted in a biologically pure urinary FSH preparation, that is urofolliculotropin, but one that still contained urinary protein. Still little bit amount of urinary proteins will be there. So this use of monoclonal antibodies, which are specific to FSH, it results in further refinement in manufacture and production of highly purified urinary FSH. So first obtain FSH and again use a monoclonal antibodies to get a specific FSH. So that here we are doing a highly purified FSH. Such preparations contains less than 0.1 IU of LH and less than 5% of unidentified urinary proteins. So they contain more than 95% of FSH activity. Even the LH activity will be less than 0.1 international IU. Furthermore, the specific activity of FSH is increased from 100 IU per milligram to 150 IU milligram proteins in purified urinary FSH preparations to approximately 10,000 IU per mg proteins in highly purified products. When we compare the first generation to second generation, the action of FSH may be increased because by purification, we are increasing the concentration of FSH. So if you consider 1 milligram of protein, in that if you get only 100 to 150 IU of FSH, same by using this monoclonal antibody, separating, purifying it. By purifying, if we consider 1 milligram of proteins, we will get 10,000 IU of FSH. That is how almost it is 100% increasing the concentration of FSH by purification procedures. The enhanced purity and increasing specific activity of Highly purified FSH, it enables subcutaneous delivery in very small volumes in addition to the virtual elimination of batch-to-batch consistency. So in this, you can see without purification in 1 milligram of protein, you were about to get 100 IU of FSH. Suppose if I want to give more, like 300 IU, 400 IU, like that, the amount of the injection required will be more. So multiple doses, the protein side effects, everything will be there. By purifying it, what happens? So 1 gram of protein has 10,000 IU of activity. That means very small amount of injection is required for the desired action. And also we are using the less volume of injections, and also proteins are less, side effects are less, and also batch to batch variations are also less. So in this diagram, we can see with the urine, they have used kaolin crude materials, and they have extracted HMG. So to the HMG, they will add the antibodies that will react with LH, and the LH are separated because of antigen antibody reaction, and we can get a MetroD. So, and also same thing, they have used a monoclonal antibodies that react with FSH. So the FSH reacts with this monoclonal antibodies, they react with FSH, and they are collected separately. So that results in recovery of the FSH. So this is the highly purified FSH, and also it contains very minimal quantity of protein and LH that can also be separated. So it is a multiple steps of preparing the injections. Coming to purified FSH, purification of HMG substantially decreases the LH-like activity. So in this image, you have seen, no, they have removed the LH activity, and then whatever the FSH was obtained, they have used a monoclonal antibodies that react with FSH, collect the pure forms of FSH, and then try to purify. So this purification of HMG substantially decreases the LH activity. High purity is the result of sophisticated chromatographic techniques. Apart from usage gel filtration, sterile filtration, and viral inactivation, these are the different techniques which they have used for the purification. So in the exam, actually gonadotropins is an important topic for the Viva. So they will ask you, like, they might ask you anything, how the preparations are done. So what is the difference between the first generation of gonadotropins to second generation? How purification is done? Why urinary, what are the disadvantage of urinary components and all, they might ask. So that's why I'm telling each point slowly so that it will be easy for you to understand. So there are different techniques through which they have done. And also there was, this was the rationale for developing the purified FSH. And also, like, by purification, we have obtained a more purified product, and it is used for ovulation induction in patient with high endogenous LH. If the LH, if the patient, suppose it is a PCO patient, on day 2 when you do a scan, you will see it is like AFCs are more. And when you do a baseline FSH, LH also, FSH will be around 4, 5, but LH will be 15, 16. In those cases, if you want to do a ovulation induction, so if you use HMG, what happens? It contains both FSH and LH. So LH, already LH is more, we are giving LH, the response may be not good because LH sealing activity will be there. So in those cases, we can use this purified FSH because they have very less LH activity. So it has helped for the development of immunopurified products. It was also suggested that FSH alone could increase folliculogenesis. Furthermore, it was speculated that LH and gonadotropin preparation could be responsible for high incidence of complications in patients with elevated serum LH values. So purification of HMG substantially decreased the LH-like activity. High purity, it is the same, like I've just repeated it. So when we compare this HMG versus purified FSH, in the HMG, the purity is less than 4%, LH-like activity is 50%. With purified FSH, the purity is around 5% and LH-like activity is 1%. With highly purified FSH, with the sophisticated technique, highly purified FSH was developed. In that, purity is 96%. In this last table, you can check the purity is 96%. And also the LH activity is less than 0.5%. 1%. By use, we can use highly purified FSH for stimulations, especially in patients where the LH activity is. Ma'am, can you mute yourself, Dr. Veena?
Yes, ma'am. Sorry, ma'am.
Okay.
Sorry, ma'am.
Then came the breakthrough. So everyone was struggling with this urinary FSH, urinary preparations, highly purified preparations. Response was not good in some cases, and there were reactions and all. So later, with the invention of recombinant technology, a breakthrough happened, and this third generation preparations, that is recombinant FSH preparation, was started. The source of natural GnRH being the urine of postmenopausal women, the rapid increase in demand led to difficulties in obtaining enough raw materials and worldwide shortage of products. So the advent of recombinant, so you can see in the few textbook, they have images how this HMG was synthesized. Like they used to collect urines of so many women's, like 500,000 barrels of postmenopausal urine was required just to get 1 gram of HMG. That is how you required more sample. With that, you used to get very small amount of the drug. As its use started, they wanted more supply. So it was very difficult to extract from postmenopausal women. So because of the advent of this recombinant DNA technology, it opened the door for production of recombinant FSH preparations. These recombinant preparations are manufactured by inserting the gene encoding for alpha and beta subunit of FSH into an expression vector that are transfected to a Chinese hamster ovarian cell lines. I will just explain with the image. All of us know how a recombinant DNA technology works. So the introduction in 96 of the first recombinant human FSH, followed by few years later by recombinant HCG, and then LH, brought through a radical change in the quality, standardization, as well as availability of gonadotropins. So this recombinant preparations, they were started in 96. So how it is done? So the DNA construct containing the coding sequence of either alpha or subunit of FSH or LH. Suppose let us take it as FSH preparation. So we'll take a DNA content which codes for the alpha and beta subunit of FSH. So that usually that is taken, and also Chinese hamster ovarian cells are co-transfected with 2 DNA construct. So with this FSH DNA that will be inserted inside this cell lines. What is the cell line which is most commonly used for this preparation is Chinese hamster ovary cells. So the stable CHO cell line containing integrated FSH or LH sequences are selected. So these cell lines are created, so they will be stored. So after creating the cell lines, they will be stored in two things. One is master cell bank and the other is working cell banks. They are prepared for the production in the bioreactors. So the FSH and LH in the cell culture are purified by chromatography techniques. So there are certain terminologies like what is cell bank? So cell bank is nothing but it is a collection of appropriate containers whose contents are of uniform composition stored under defined conditions. So each container represents an aliquot of single pools of cells. Cell bank is nothing but like cluster of cells are stored. That is, single pool of cells are stored. So each cell will have a definite DNA material. Like you have FSH, the DNA coding for FSH may be transfected with the CHO cells, or it may be the LH, or it may be the HCG. So particular cells are stored in a container. They will have a uniform composition. So, and they are stored in particular numbers. These are called as cell banks. So next comes another word called master cell bank. So usually the collection of cells of uniform composition, it is derived from a single source. From a single source, you will collect so many cells and store it in different numbers. That is called as master cell bank. So, and another one is working cell bank. This is derived from one or more vials from master cell bank and used for production. So you will take the cells. So you will store from a single source, you will store it in different names. Suppose It is like vial 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So 10 vials are there. This 10 vials are called as master cell banks. In the 10 vials, if I want to prepare a FSH hormone, I will take the vial number 1. So put it in the bioreactor and produce the FSH hormones. So this, whatever the number one vial I will take and prepare the hormone, that vial, number 1 vial is called as working cell bank. Working cell bank 1, working cell bank 2, like that. That is how the recombinant injections are prepared. Why we have to know this? Why it is important? Why I'm telling all these things? One thing is, suppose, so you have ordered an injection. So you are stimulating a patient. So you have ordered some batch number 23 of recombinant FSH. So you have given the injection and you have seen like the response is not at all good. So again, for another patient, you will use the batch number 25. So the response will be very good. Same company injection, but different batches. So by knowing this batch number, immediately you can tell the company person and tell that the response from the batch 23 was not good, just check it. So what they will do, if the response is not good, they will go back to the manufacturing working cell bank, from which working cell bank this hormone was produced. So how many hormones are there with this same working cell bank and how many batch numbers are there? They can cross-check it and they can stop the usage of those batch of injections which are not working good. That is why the batch number is important when we consider this gonadotropins. We should know what is working cell bank, what is master cell bank, and the cell banks itself. So this is in simple the process of the DNA technology. So in this image, we can see there is a vector. So cutting the vector by DNA. So, and there is a DNA. So that is, DNA may be related to FSH, LH, or HCG, whichever hormone you want to synthesize. So cut the certain part of DNA with the enzymes, and also here cut the part of the vector with the enzymes, then put the DNA, ligate them, and form a recombinant vectors. So once this recombinant vectors are containing the targeted genes are produced, they are transfected into the host cell and they undergo multiplication. They undergo multiplication several times in a bioreactor and they are removed and these hormones are extracted. So I was telling about vector and cell safety, and here we can see like these are the cells. They're stored in the master cell bank and then into the working cell bank, and individual vials will be taken and sent to the bioreactors. They are multiplied like hundreds, 1,000 times, and the medicines are obtained. They will check the quality assessment and quality control will be done, and then drug products are released into the market. So the master cell banks consist of individual vials containing identical cells, which are cryopreserved until required. Thus, a continuous supply of RFSH with a guaranteed consistency from working cell bank to working cell bank is now available by expansion of cells recovered from single vial of master cell bank. The master cell bank and working cell banks are routinely tested for sterility, mycoplasma, and viral contaminations. So recombinant technology, how does it work? Already I'm just telling in glance. There will be a culture media, there will be a bioreactor, and here it is harvested. Production, the cell attachment and proliferations will be there. Recombinant human FSH preparations and secretions. There is collection of cell culture supernatant medium containing recombinant human FSH, and also they will check for QA/QC. This, if you want, you can just go back, check in your biochemistries for recombinant injections. So two recombinant human FSH preparations has been registered as folliculotropin alpha, which was marketed first in 1995 in the name of Gonalef by Merck Serono International Company, and also folliculotropin beta marketed as Recagon, that is Organon. So recombinant FSH has been found to be cost effective. Like still the cost is more compared to purified injections. The two recombinant FSH preparations are currently available, are marketed as folliculotropin alpha and folliculotropin beta. Both are structurally identical to the native FSH, and despite being named folliculotropin alpha and beta, they compromises one alpha and one beta glycoprotein chains. These dissimilar glycoprotein chains are non-covalently linked being conjoined by electrostatic and hydrophobic forces. They are attached to two complex carbohydrate structure. This is a chemical structure I've just explained in simple words. And also after the molecule is obtained, post-glycosylation process and purification procedures are done. Of the two recombinant FSH preparations are not identical. Once you get the FSH preparation, after that there is a step called post-glycosylation step, as well as there is a purification procedures. So for both these preparation, folliculotrophin alpha and beta, there is slight difference in the two steps. It results in different sialic acid residues composition and slightly different isoelectric coefficients. The subtle difference in structure have not resulted in any proven differences in the clinical performance. In contrast to the FSH content of urinary derived FSH, that of recombinant FSH preparation can be quantified by protein content, that is mass in milligram, rather than biological activity. So now there is one more question, like how you will measure the FSH content, how you will measure the FSH action. So if you give 1 milligram of FSH action, how do you quantify it? So this I will explain now in detail later. So usually this recombinant injection, they usually come with a delivery system for recombinant FSH products. Usually it comes in a pen form, just like our insulin, how we administer like that. So pen-shaped administration devices that either are pre-filled or can be adjusted to variable delivery, adjusted to deliver variable amounts of gonadotropins contained in the vials. All preparations are packed as lyophilized powders with exception of liquid formulations found in cartridges or pens. So this is like, I've taken the image of Gonalaf injections. So quantifying and standardizing the gonadotropin content. So traditionally, quantification of FSH, LH, and HCG for clinical use is involved in use of in vivo bioassay. So usually it is mainly because of bioassays. You just try to remember the names, like how they are quantified. Sometimes they may ask in the examination also. So the Steelman-Pole in vivo assay. So the first assay to know the action was invented in 1950. That is Steelman-Pole assay. Here it was done on rats after injecting FSH for a few days and then weighing the weight. It is time consuming, cumbersome, uses large number of rats, which is of ethical concern. It is limited in its precision. So what they used to do is they used to inject the FSH, certain amount of FSH, and then kill the rats, then weigh their ovaries. By giving so much of FSH, how much weight was increased in the rat, especially the weight of the ovaries. So this was like very cumbersome. It had a lot of ethical issues. The most significant advantage of this over other commercially available gonadotropins is that it permits FSH to be quantified reliably by protein content, that is mass in milligram, rather than by biological activity. Here we are measuring weight, mainly protein content. So the other, nowadays it is not used. Various other chemical analytical techniques, such as especially the size exclusion, HPLC precise and robust assay that results in significant improvement in batch-to-batch consistency. The highly consistent physiochemical and biological property of the product now permits FSH quantification by same thing like size exclusion, HPLC techniques, and vials or ampoules can be filled by mass rather than by specific biological activity. So usually you just remember this size exclusion HPLC is used to quantify, and it is mainly filled by mass. This is an example, like it is a Steelman-Pole ovarian weight augmentation assay for FSH. FSH is injected for 3 days. So what they used to do is like a sacrifice on day 4 and collect the ovaries and weigh the ovaries. The recombinant LH, it is like same thing. Here, when we have to prepare the recombinant LH, instead of FSH gene, we have to take the DNA coding for LH and then transfect into the vector, and then with recombinant technology, we have to prepare it. The gene for the other gonadotropins were also be transfected into the mammillary cell line, and recombinant human LH as Luvaris is produced. Has been produced with superior purity and great specific activity than HMG, which contains only about HMG has only 2% of LH. So this recombinant LH is very good. It is highly purified. It has a very specific action. This purity allows the subcutaneous injections. The preparations of RLH has been available for clinical use since 93 in the vials with syringe that together are designed to deliver 75 IU. The products may enhance follicular development when used in conjunction with FSH in patients with hypogonadotropic hypogonadism and profound LH deficiencies. This is the Luvaris injections. Mainly it comes in the single brand name, that is recombinant LH, that is Luvaris by Merck Serono. Usually comes in 75 IU vials. So now coming to chorionic gonadotropin preparations, the chorionic gonadotropin is used to promote the final stage maturation and progression of mature stage prophase 1, the germinal vesicle stage, and through the maturation to metaphase 2. So usually HCG is given for the final stage maturations. So HCG can be human derived from urine of pregnant women or manufactured using recombinant technology. The preparation of HCG are marketed in the vials as 2000, 5000 or 10,000 IU. So the recombinant HCG, it comes in the brand name that is Ovitrel. Usually it contains 250 milligram of the products. So this 250 microgram of Ovitrel is equivalent to 5,000 to 6,000 IU of HCG action. So usually if you want to give a Ovitrel injection, usually we give 250 microgram of single injection. So because 5 to 6,000 IU action is sufficient. So recombinant HCG has a superior purity and consistency than urinary HCG. Subcutaneous injection may be self-administered. So here there is a difference. If you use a urinary or highly purified HCG, the dose is 5,000 IU. If you use Ovitrel, the dose is 250 microgram, which is equivalent to 5 to 6, sometimes they tell it as 6,500 IU. Bioavailability is 40% with normal HCG, urinary HCG. Here also it is 40%. Half-life is 33 hours. Here it is 30 hours. Only thing is like action is similar, only slight difference in the pharmacokinetics and dynamics will be there. And also it is highly purified. Ovitrel is recombinant, so side effects and all will be less. Coming to Cochrane studies, so recombinant versus urinary HCG for ovulation induction assisted reproductive technology. So this was like, they have noted there is no difference in the reproductive outcomes by using different forms of HCG. Whether you use urinary HCG or whether you use recombinant, the reproductive outcome is same. And also a study by Madani et al. In 2013 comparing the efficacy of urinary and recombinant HCG to trigger ovulation in ICSI cycle shows equivalent efficacy of recombinant HCG and urinary HCG. A dose of 500 micrograms was found to be most efficacious than 250 in the study. They have noted in 2000, so several studies. So these are called as dose finding studies. So they were done to note with what dose of injections will be adequate, which gives good results. So only in this study, they have noted instead of using 250 microgram of Ovitrel, instead of one vial, use 2 vials. So the results will be same. This is the only study which has told to use more dose, but otherwise majority of the study says 250 is sufficient. Now coming to another preparation, that is long-acting FSH hormone, that is corifolliculotropin alpha. This we are not using, this is not freely available in the market in India, so we are not yet used, and its effect and results are still not known in many centers in India. So molecular engineering provides the technology to modify FSH preparations to prolong their half-lives and therapeutic action, thereby reducing the number of injections required to achieve optimal follicular growth. So this is called as FSH-CTP, that is alpha subunit of recombinant human FSH. And also there is a hybrid beta subunit of human FSH. That is what is hybrid is in the beta subunit of FSH, they have added the C-terminal part to the beta subunit. By adding the C-terminal part, so the half-life of FSH has increased. So the half-life is 2 to 3 times longer, that is around 65 hours. So recommended dose of corifolliculotropin alpha is 150 microgram for patient with body weight more than 60 and 100 microgram for patient with body weight less than 60. So single injection of long-acting FSH replaces 7 days of FSH injections during the first week of controlled ovarian stimulation, and it can make ART more patient-friendly. Like what happens nowadays for IVF stimulation, every day the patient has to come for injections. So they will be working and they have to travel. Lot of concerns will be there. That's why this long-acting FSH was prepared. So here, if you give one injection after 7 days, they can come for the follow-up. So certain studies have been done like Engage, Ensure, and Trust regarding this preparations. This is the corifolliculotropin alpha. You can see that in the beta subunit, C-terminal peptide has been added. So there are so many investigations which is going on regarding the long-acting FSH. Coming to the advantage of recombinant FSH versus purified FSH. So in recombinant technology, there is no impurities, there is no impure proteins, so there is no prion scares. Traceability, as I explained you in working cell bank and master cell bank, traceability is good. They have a high purity and specific activity, and they have unlimited supplies. How much ever you want, it can be synthesized with a batch-to-batch consistency. They're absolute monohormonal product. If it is recombinant FSH means it has FSH action only. No LH, no HCG. That's why these are absolute monohormonal products. These are circumvention of, and also there is no immune reactions and all are very less. And so subcutaneous administration, they can be administered self. Ready to use pen devices are there, and superior quality control. Coming to therapeutic indications of FSH in women, in anovulation unresponsive to CC, hypogonadotropic hypogonadism, and also controlled ovarian hypostimulations in IVF. In men, it is congenital or acquired hypogonadotropic hypogonadisms. Contraindications are hypersensitivity, tumors of hypothalamus, pituitary gland, ovarian cyst, abnormal uterine bleeding, ovarian, uterine, and breast cancer, and also in premature ovarian failure and primary testicular failures. Coming to side effects, the immune-related side effects like mild erythema, rash, sometimes severe anaphylaxis is very less in case of recombinant. In urinary gonadotropins, you might experience. So nervous system involvement, they might have a headache. In respiratory system, slight exacerbation of asthma may be seen less than 1 in 10,000 cases. Thromboembolism less than 1 in 10,000 of the cases. And GI like nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, abdominal cramps, and bloating, it is mainly related to hyperstimulation rather than injection itself. And in reproductive system, they can cause ovarian cyst, mild to moderate OHSS, severe OHSS, ovarian torsion. So administration site, pain, redness, bruising, swelling, and irritation may be seen. So coming to gonadotropins are better today because of quality issues, clinical efficacy, patient's convenience, support, and safety. So, and also like in the safety issue, we can see there is, with the urinary products, there may be a prion scares, but here there is no prion scares with the recombinant injections. So prion diseases, they are protein containing particle with no detectable nucleic acids. These are slow infectious diseases, highly resistant infectious agents, and no inflammation or immune response. Coming to the safety issues, impurities in the urinary derived products, the precautionary principle, the commissioner, like there are a lot of quality and quality assessment and also the control of the batch to batch is there. So I'm just skipping this So, and also there is a dose precision. One more concept is called dose precision. That is, if you give 75 IU of the particular recombinant injection, you can expect the same response by giving 75 IU to different patients. So that is called as dose precision. This amount of dose should produce this amount of response. So, and also if you do it, this is like dose precision is there when we use this bioassay, that is filled by mass compared to filled by bioassay. So this I'm just skipping it because it is too much. So if you see, like if you use the total by using recombinant FSH, the amount of the FSH which is required for the stimulation is less when compared to using HMG or highly purified HMGs. So, and also there are so many concert treatment, that is how much dose is required to produce certain amount and what is the result. All the studies have been done. This we will tell you in detail when we go for IVF stimulations. So here in the study, you can see like by giving 75 IU, what was the response by giving 112.5, what was the response by giving 150 IU, 187.5, 225, what is the response in IVF stimulation. So how many embryos obtained, how many transferred, what is the pregnancy rates, and how many like cases had severe OHSs. Optimal results like a good clinical pregnancy rate were obtained when we had used 150 to 187.5 international units of RFSH. So these are the different gonadotropins preparations which are available. HMG, like there are so many companies. Urinary HCG is there. Highly purified HMG, urinary FSH, highly purified FSH, and also recombinant FSH, LH, and HCG. So, and also one more concept is premature luteinizing hormone surge. That is, after commencement of treatment, serum LH concentration usually falls progressively in response to the normal ovarian pituitary feedback as the dominant follicle grows. This negative feedback mechanisms will be there, and also the LH should come down during the follicular phase. The fall coincides with the stimulation of follicular development and may be due to suppression of endogenous LH by estradiol. However, some women with PCO continue to over-secrete this LH in presence of follicular growth. There is evidence that lowering of high endogenous LH level has a beneficial influence on the conception rate, both in women with PCO and in women undergoing ovulation induction for IVF. So there is also evidence that hypersecretion of endogenous LH is associated with increased pregnancy loss. To overcome this premature LH surge during ovarian stimulation, gonadotropin releasing analogs were introduced in ovarian stimulation protocols. So I told you earlier, by modifying the 10 amino acids, we will get a products like GnRH agonist, GnRH antagonist. So these are mainly used to prevent this premature LH surge and to control the ovarian stimulations properly. So regarding this GnRH agonist and antagonist, I'll explain you in detail in the next class. Day-to-day practice, we will be using HMG, FSH, and also will be using HCG injections for the ovulation trigger. So I'm discussing 3 cases. So I'll tell you like what is the importance of each case. So case number 1, Mrs. X, aged 31 years, and Mr. Y, aged 35 years, came with history of primary infertility for 5 years. The wife menstrual cycle was irregular once in 1.5 to 2 months with 6 to 5 days of bleeding. No history of dysmenorrhea, average flow. Past medical history shows there is weight gain, increased facial hair growth, for which she was taken laser treatment. In family history, mother was hypothyroid and she had irregular cycle. Both parents had diabetes on medications, and no history of infertility in the family. In husband's side, there is no history of smoking or drinking. Family history, father has diabetes on medication. No history of infertility in the family. Couple coital history was normal. No history of using contraception. In treatment history, wife had undergone 3 cycles in 2018, 3 cycles of ovulation induction attempted with CC 50 to 100 microgram for 5 days, milligram for 5 days from day 3 to day 7. There was no follicular growth, so cycle were cancelled. In 2019, 2 cycles of ovulation induction was done using letrozole 5 mg from day 3 to day 7 There was no evidence of dominant follicle till day 20, so the cycle was cancelled. So on examination, wife had acne, hirsutism. General physical examination was normal. Investigations like TSH was 3.5, prolactin was normal, obesity 111, and AMH is 9.6. And also in day 3, FSH is 6.8, LH is 10.5, LH is more. And also on scan, bilateral polycystic ovary features were there. So follicles on the right side was 16 to 20 and also like 16 to 20 on both sides, and the volume was also more. So husband examination was normal. His other general tests were normal. Semen test 18 million was the count. Total motility was 42%, progressive was 37, and normal forms were 2%. So wife was advised for weight reduction and regular exercise, and Theranon 50 was prescribed. Folic acid supplementations, anisetols, and metformins were started. So couple were on laparoscopic ovarian drilling was done. Both the tubes were patent. Ovulation induction was started after baseline scan on day 2. Counseled about the chances of hyperstimulation, delayed response, and chances of cycle cancellation, as well as if there is any hyperstimulation. So advised adequate fluid intake and high protein diet, and husband was advised lifestyle modification and antioxidants. So in this cycle, like on day 3, 18 to 20 AFC was there on both sides. Endo was 3 mm. Letrozole was started 2.5 milligram daily for 5 days, and injection RFSS 75 IU daily was given for 6 days. So on day 9, there was no dominant follicle. Endo was 6 mm triple line. So slightly the dose of RFSH was increased to 87.5 IU. So usually like...
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yeah, tell me.
Injection recombinant FSH was started from day 3rd itself.
Day 3rd itself, ma'am.
Oh, day 3rd, it was given for 6 days.
And also like later the dose was increased to 87.5 IU. So there are different injections like syringes which comes. So that what we will give is when we have to increase the dose, we can increase extra 75 plus 37.5 IU extra. Since she was a PCO patient, we gave extra, like even that half of that 37.5 was given. That is total dose was 87.5. So usually if it is like that, usually we add, in some cases we add extra 75 plus 37.5, that is 112.5 IU. You can use it in day-to-day practice. Only if you have experienced sister who can give it very accurately with that dose adjustments, you can give this. But 87.5, we don't use it for all regular cases. Usually 112.5, we will give if there is no response for 75. Okay. So in this case, 87.5 IU was given. So on day 11, she was called for the scan. So on the right ovary, one follicle of 12 mm and another follicle of 11 mm were noted. So again, since the response was seen and same dominant follicle had developed, so same dose of injection was continued for that patient. So with the same dose of injections on day 13, so a dominant follicle of 15 mm was seen on the right ovary. On the left ovary, there was 12, and on the left ovary, largest was also 12. So on day 15, so the largest follicle on the right ovary was 20. So, and also on the left ovary was 13. Here it was 14. These are intermediate follicles. So one was very good size. Endo was 9 mm and HCG 5000 IU was given. Timed intercourse was advised for 2 days. Follicular scan was done to confirm the ovulation on day 17. So luteal phase support with micronized progesterone 400 milligram per vaginally twice. And with dydrogesterone 10 milligram 3 times daily was done, and she conceived, and it was a singleton pregnancy. So whenever you are going for the stimulation of the PCO, you can use the chronic like chronic low dose step-up protocols. So don't start with higher dose and don't change the injections or increase the dose.
Ma'am, I have a question, ma'am.
Yeah, tell me, ma'am.
Previous stimulation, after day 12, you will add HMG, is it? Just if you go back the previous.
Ma'am, one thing is like not in all cases, but sometimes in day 15 onwards, once the follicle reaches more than 14 mm. So we will convert it if the patient will convert it into HMG in few cases where we have to cut down the cost of FSH, and also once the follicle reaches 14 mm, the LH receptor starts appearing. So then the response will be final follicular maturation. If we had little bit of LH component, it will be very good. So in those cases, multiple failed cycles. And here we can see like 5 to 6 cycles, there was no dominant follicle had not developed down. So that's why in this case, we had given the same dose of HMG just for final follicular maturation.
So
It
is
need
there
not
any
be like-
strict criteria that
No, ma'am.
we have to?
No. It is not like you have to change. There is no strict criteria. So you
Okay.
can continue the same dose of FSH till it reaches 20 also. One thing is by adding HMG, there are two advantages. One is we can cut down the cost. And also like it will help in final follicular maturation. There is no strict criteria that you have to change.
Okay. Thank you.
But ma'am, in this case, the LH was already high now because she was PCOS.
Actually, when we start the stimulation, ovarian drilling was done, and 1 cycle prior to the stimulation, she was prescribed oral contraceptives. So usually we check the day 2, day 3 LH and then start the stimulation. In these cases, usually LH will be, when it is less than 5, we will start the stimulation. So this HMG we cannot use when you have not day 3 baseline FSH is like more than 10 or 12 like that. So in those cases you cannot use. So even if you feel like in certain PCO patients, even if you give RFSH for many days, sometimes they may not respond also. So if you had little bit of this HMG, we can see certain response in certain patients because certain amount of LH is required for the follicular growth. Like after ovarian drilling, so drastically, like sometimes if the drilling is more, the LH would have reduced. So always in a PCO patient, when we are doing the stimulation, check the baseline FSH and LH value and then start the stimulation. FSH, LH, E2. Suppose like in the same patient on day 3, if the LH was not less than 5, I would have given GnRH antag for 1 day and repeat the LH next day. That is after 24 hours check. If the LH has reduced less than 5, then I would have started the stimulation. Any other doubts, ma'am?
Madam,
If
following
LH is high,
following-
we can. Sorry.
okay. Excuse me.
Yeah,
Madam,
continue. ma'am.
following ovarian drilling, 1 cycle of OCPs, then start with the this one.
It's not, ma'am, it is not mandatory. It depends. Like
Okay.
this patient had multiple TI failures. There was no response only. And her LH was little bit high, we had given. And it is not mandatory that we have to give 1 cycle OCP, not like that. After ovarian drilling, in the next cycle only, we can start the stimulation.
Okay.
Ma'am, if LH is very high, then only one day you will give antag. Otherwise, like you will cancel, or how is it like?
Ma'am, we will give oral contraceptive pill for 21 days and then stimulate in the next cycle.
Okay.
If
Thank
the
you.
LH is too high.
Ma'am, at what cutoff of LH you would like to cancel the cycle? It goes beyond 10 in the along with the baseline.
Yes, ma'am. Usually, ideally, we will start when it is less than 5. It is between 5 to 10. Usually, we give antag and then check. If it has reduced to less than 5, we will start. If it is more than 10, usually we give 1 cycle OCPs and then start.
Okay.
Ma'am, how much anta we give?
Ma'am, 1 vial, that is 0.25. Coming to the second case, here Mrs. X aged 27 years and Mr. Y aged 30 years came with history of primary infertility for 3 years. Wife menstrual cycles are irregular once in 3 to 4 months with 2 to 3 days of bleeding, no history of dysmenorrhea. Past medical history, she was hypothyroid on tablet Thyronorm 100 mcg. So family history, both parents have diabetes on medication. No history of infertility in the family. Husband, no history of smoking or drinking. Mother has diabetes. Coital history is normal. Treatment history, wife outside. She has not taken any treatment. So examination was normal. When we did the scan, AFC was 7 to 8 on both sides, and ovarian volume on the right was 6, left was 7. So CBC viral markers was normal. Day 2, day 3, FSH was less than 0.1, LH was less than 0.1, E2 was 9. Her prolactin was 32, TSH is 2.3, testosterone was normal, and also AMH 4.1, which is normal. So mainly FSH, LH, E2 was less. MRI scan of hypothalamo-pituitary region was normal. Olfactory test was normal. So here in this case, endocrinologist had diagnosed idiopathic hypogonadotropic hypogonadism. So HSG bilateral tubes were pattern, uterus was normal, husband normospermic. Here in this case, since LH is less than 0.1, usually when we are doing stimulation or ovulation induction, we have to use HMG. Or we can, if the patient is okay, we can give recombinant FSH and recombinant LH. Reports were discussed on questioning further. Wife revealed that she used to get periods only after taking withdrawal medications. This was earlier, they had not revealed anything. So she used to get periods only after taking withdrawal medications. So she was diagnosed with sarcoidosis 6 years back on NSAIDs, and she was on steroids on and off. She did not reveal it to the husband and his family members, and there was no history of previous surgery or chemoradiations. So this history she had not told anyone, including us. So even after repeated questioning, she told she was on NSAIDs and steroids on and off. So again, with this history, endocrinologist and physician opinion in our hospital was taken. So she was advised for ovulation induction with gonadotropins and counseled in detail about the procedure. So with gonadotropins, we directly, because she is a hypo patient, so clomiphene citrate and all will not act properly. So once the hypothalamo-pituitary ovarian axis is not correct. So we started directly with HMG stimulation because HMG has equal quantity of FSH as well as LH. So her AFC was 7 to 8 on both sides. On day 2, we started with HMG injection 75 IU for 7 days. Later, from day 9 to day 12, there was no response. So it was increased to 87.5 for 4 days. And then on day 13, the response started. So when before starting the response, ovulation induction also, patient was counseled in detail about, one is delayed response. We may require more days of injections, more follow-ups. And also we may require more dose of injections. So all these were counseled. Financial part was also counseled. So on day 13, response started. 11 mm follicle on the right ovary and 10.5 on the left ovary. Sometimes what we do is from day 10, day 11, if we see there is no response, they are all the same size, we tend to cancel the cycle. But in these cases, in hypo patients, it is better to continue the stimulation till day 19, day 20 and see. So dominant follicle started appearing on day 13 in this case. So same dose was continued, HMG. So on day 18, a dominant follicle of 20 mm on the right ovary and 16 mm on the right and 11 mm on the left ovary was seen, and was good 9 mm tripline gradient. So trigger of choice is HCG in hypo patients. So and HCG 5000 was given, and she was advised to have timed intercourse for 2 days. So follicular scan was done on day 20 here. Sorry, there is a typing mistake. So day 20 to confirm the ovulation. Luteal phase support was given, same micronized progesterone, dydrogesterone, UPT was positive, and it is a singleton pregnancy which is continuing. So in this case, what we have to know, one thing we have to know about the LH window. So one is adequate LH value is required for the optimal growth of the follicle. Suppose if the LH value is less than the threshold, what happens? So the granulosa cell proliferation, so it is very much required. The LH is very much required for granulosa cell proliferation, induction of granulosa cell aromatase activity by FSH. And also there is no paracrine signaling between granulosa cells and theca cell, no androgen and estrogen synthesis. There is no full oocyte maturation. If the LH value is less than the threshold, what happens? There is no signaling between granulosa cells and theca cells, no androgens and no estrogen synthesis, and oocyte will not mature. if the value, if you give more LH, if the LH value is more than whatever the ceiling, that is the upper limit, if it is more than upper limit, there will be suppression of granulosa cell proliferation, there will be follicular atresia, there will be premature luteinization, oocyte development will be compromised. If the LH value is also more, so there is a problem. So the LH should be in this optimal LH window. If it is an optimal LH window, all the development, the androgen, estrogen synthesis, follicular maturations and all will be normal. So, and also sarcoidosis is a disease which involves abnormal collection of inflammatory cells that form a lump known as granuloma. The disease usually begins in the lung, skin and lymph nodes. The cause of sarcoidosis is not known. Some believe it may be due to an immune reaction to a trigger such as infection or chemicals in those who are genetically predisposed. So prolactin is frequently increased in sarcoidosis between 3 to 32% of cases having hyperprolactinemia. This frequently leads to amenorrhea, galactorrhea, and non-puerperal mastitis in women. So thyroid dysfunction may also be noted. So we rarely come across this sarcoidosis cases and all. It is very rare, that too with presentations of this kind of secondary amenorrhea with requiring only OCPs are also very rare. So the next case is like Mrs. A, age 28 year, presented to the OPD with history of abdominal distension, heaviness, breathlessness since 2 days. On taking detailed history, following details were noted. Menstrual cycle was irregular, once in 1.5 to 2 months, with 6 to 7 days of bleeding. No history of dysmenorrhea. LMP was 20 days back. And past medical history of urticaria on and off, history of appendectomy in childhood, history of laparoscopic ovarian drilling for PCO 1 year back. Family history, father had hypertension, mother was hypothyroid. She had bronchial asthma on medication, no history of infertility in the family. Treatment history, she has underwent many cycles of ovulation induction with CC Letrose since 2 years. Details were not available. In this cycle, ovulation induction with Letrose with gonadotropins was given outside. So during treatment cycle, she developed abdominal bloating, abdominal distension. So ultrasound, baseline ultrasound before starting stimulation, it was bilateral PCO, uterus was normal, AFC was 16 to 20 on both sides. So our OGCT, TSH, prolactin was normal, AMH was 8.6, baseline FSH was 4.8, LH was 11.2, and E2 was 46. So on general examination, like slight tachycardia was there, respiratory rate was 28. So SpO2 was 95%, bilateral basal Krebs was seen, and fluid distension was there, and abdominal girth was 105 centimeter, and wife was admitted for ICU for further investigations. So this was the scan picture. You can see the free fluid around the ovaries, the uterus, free fluid in POD was there. Bilateral ovaries were enlarged with multiple follicular development. So this was her scan findings on day 3. So AFC, like on that day, it was around 20-24. So on both sides, letrozole 2.5, BD for 5 days was given, and HMG 75 units was given outside on day 3, day 5, day 7. So on day 9, they have seen the response like 12 mm follicle, 11 mm follicle here, 13-12 has come. In spite of that, the HMG dose was increased from 75 to 150. 150 dose was given for 3 days. So on day 12, she had multiple follicle development like 15, 14, 13. In the left ovary, 13, 12, 11 was there. Still the gonadotropin was given. On day 14, the follicles were 17, 16, 15, 12, 15, 14, and on the left ovary, it was 15, 14, 13, 12. So 75 IU was given. So on day 15, the multiple follicles, multiple dominant follicles were seen. And also endo was 10 mm triple. In spite of multiple follicle development, so HCG injection was given, which led to ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. So patient selection is important. Chronic low-dose step-up protocol has to be done. So if there is multiple follicle development, cancel the cycle, and proper counseling of the patient is required. So whenever you are using gonadotropin, be cautious. If you have multiple follicle development, cancel the cycle. Don't give trigger in this stage and all. Patient will land up in ICU. So using gonadotropin is beneficial, as well as it has to be used judiciously. Otherwise, patient will end up in hyperstimulations.